Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for 17 years, and he thought he had developed an immunity to being surprised. He'd seen families celebrate victories, watched people give the most bizarre answers imaginable, witnessed emotional reunions, and heated competitions. But on that crisp November afternoon in 2024, a 42-year-old elementary school teacher named Sarah Mitchell was about to give an answer that would stop him cold, silence an entire studio audience, and reveal a story so powerful that it would change how millions of people thought about teachers, trauma, and the quiet heroes working in America's schools. Before we dive into Sarah's incredible story, if you believe in honoring the teachers who shape our children's lives and the unsung heroes who help kids heal from trauma, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. What you're about to hear will remind you why teachers are so much more than educators. They're lifelines for children facing the unimaginable. The Peterson family from Denver, Colorado, stood ready to compete against the Mitchell family from Louisville, Kentucky. Sarah Mitchell was playing alongside her husband David, a firefighter, her sister Jennifer, a nurse, her brother-in-law Marcus, an accountant, and her mother Patricia, a retired postal worker. They were a warm, energetic family, laughing and joking with each other during the introductions, wearing matching blue t-shirts with Mitchell Family printed across the front in white letters. Sarah stood in the middle position, a woman of average height with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had a gentle smile and a quiet demeanor that suggested someone more comfortable listening than being the center of attention. During the introductions, Steve Harvey did his usual routine, asking each family member what they did for a living and making jokes to get everyone relaxed. When he got to Sarah, she mentioned that she was a fourth-grade teacher at Parkside Elementary School in Louisville. Steve made the typical teacher jokes, asking if she gave homework on Fridays and if she had a teacher voice that could quiet a room. Sarah laughed good-naturedly and said yes to both questions, demonstrating a firm but kind, "That's enough now," that made the audience chuckle. It seemed like a perfectly normal, light-hearted exchange. Nothing about it suggested what was coming. The game progressed normally through the first few rounds. Both families were competitive, giving good answers and playing well. The Mitchell family was slightly ahead as they moved into the later rounds, having won a couple of key face-offs that gave them control of the board. Sarah had been a solid player, giving thoughtful answers that reflected her organized, analytical mind. When she was at the podium, she took a moment to think before responding, unlike some contestants who blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Steve noticed and appreciated her measured approach. The turning point came during the fourth round. The question on the board was, name something a teacher might have in their classroom that helps children feel safe. It was a relatively straightforward question, the kind Family Feud asked regularly about common professions. The Peterson family had control of the board and had already given 3 answers: colorful posters, comfortable reading corner, and class pet. They had 2 strikes and needed to find the remaining answers to win the round. Sarah's family was waiting on the side, ready to steal if the Petersons struck out. The next Peterson family member, a college student named Tyler, guessed "nice teacher's desk" and got a strike. That was their 3rd strike, which meant the Mitchell family had a chance to steal. Steve walked over to the Mitchell family, and they huddled together to discuss their answer. They had to give one answer that was on the board, and if they got it right, they would steal all the points the Petersons had accumulated. The family discussed several options: books, toys, windows, soft lighting. Finally, they agreed to let Sarah answer since she was the teacher and would know best. Sarah stepped up to the podium, and Steve positioned himself next to her with his microphone. "All right, Sarah," Steve said with his characteristic enthusiasm. "You're a 4th-grade teacher, so you should know this better than anyone. Name something a teacher might have in their classroom that helps children feel safe. What's your answer? Sarah looked at Steve, and something shifted in her expression. The playful energy that had characterized her participation in the game drained away, replaced by something deeper and more serious. She glanced back at her family, who nodded encouragingly, not yet understanding that this wasn't just a game show question for Sarah. It was something much more personal. Sarah turned back to Steve and the board, took a deep breath, and said in a quiet but steady voice, "A lockdown kit." The studio fell silent. Steve's smile faltered. He looked at Sarah, then at the board, clearly not expecting that answer. The audience, which had been cheering and clapping throughout the game, went completely quiet. Even the Peterson family stopped their supportive chatter and looked at Sarah with sudden attention. "A lockdown kit?" Steve repeated, his voice uncertain. "Yes," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "A lockdown kit. It's a bag or box that teachers keep in their classrooms with supplies for if there's a school shooting or another emergency where we have to lock down. It has things like first aid supplies, a flashlight, emergency contact information, sometimes snacks and water for the kids, and other items we might need if we're locked in the classroom for an extended period." The silence in the studio deepened. Steve Harvey, rarely at a loss for words, stood there holding his microphone, staring at this elementary school teacher who had just pulled back the curtain on a reality that most people preferred not to think about. Children's classrooms weren't just places of learning and growth. In modern America, they were also potential crisis zones, and teachers had to prepare accordingly. Steve looked at the board, and there it was. Lockdown's safety kit was the number 2 answer, worth 32 points. The board revealed the answer, and the Mitchell family won the round, stealing all the points from the Petersons. But nobody cheered. The usual celebration that accompanied a successful steal didn't happen. Sarah's family members hugged her, but their expressions were somber, understanding. The audience applauded respectfully but quietly, the energy in the room completely transformed. Steve Harvey stood there, and instead of moving immediately to the next round as he normally would, he did something unusual. He asked the producers to pause for a moment. He turned to Sarah and said, "Can we talk about this? Because I think what you just said, what you just revealed, is something people need to hear. Is that okay with you?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Steve gestured for Sarah to stay at the podium, and he positioned himself next to her, the game show temporarily suspended for something more important. "Sarah," Steve began gently, "I've got to be honest with you. When you said lockdown kit, my heart just stopped. Can you explain to everyone what that is and why you have one in your classroom?" Sarah took a breath, gathering her thoughts, and then she began to speak. Her voice was calm and clear, the voice of someone who had thought about this topic many times, who had lived with this reality every single day. A lockdown kit is something that many teachers across America keep in their classrooms now, Sarah explained. It's part of our emergency preparedness, just like fire drills used to be the main safety concern. But now we do active shooter drills, and we prepare for the possibility that someone might come into our school with the intent to harm our students. The kit has basic supplies, bandages and gauze, in case someone is injured, a flashlight in case we lose power, a list of all my students and their emergency contacts. Sometimes I keep granola bars and juice boxes, because if we're locked down for hours, the kids might get hungry, or their blood sugar might drop. I have a battery-powered radio, a phone charger, and a few other items that might help keep my students safe and calm if we're in a crisis situation. The audience listened in absolute silence. Some people had tears in their eyes. This wasn't the fun, lighthearted game show experience they had expected. This was real, raw truth about what it meant to be a teacher in America in 2024. Steve asked the question that many people were thinking. How long have you been doing this? How long have teachers had to prepare for this kind of situation? Sarah's expression grew even more serious. I've been teaching for 18 years, Mr. Harvey. For the first 10 years, we did fire drills and earthquake drills because I'm in Kentucky and we occasionally have small earthquakes. But everything changed for me and my school 8 years ago. She paused, and Steve could see her composure starting to crack slightly. 8 years ago, there was an incident at our school. A former student who was struggling with mental health issues came to the school with a weapon. He didn't get into the building because our principal, a man named Robert Chen, confronted him in the parking lot and managed to de-escalate the situation before anyone was hurt. But it could have been so different. It could have been a tragedy. And after that day, everything changed for us. Sarah's voice was shaking now, but she continued. We installed new security systems. We started doing lockdown drills every month, and we were all required to have emergency kits in our classrooms. I remember the first time I assembled my lockdown kit. I sat in my classroom after school, putting bandages and emergency information into a backpack, and I just cried. Because the reality hit me that I wasn't just a teacher anymore. I was potentially a first responder, a protector, someone who might have to make life or death decisions to keep my students safe. Steve Harvey stood there, visibly shaken by what he was hearing. He looked at Sarah with an expression of deep respect and sadness. Sarah, I've got to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But has anything else happened? Have you had to use your lockdown kit? Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they were filled with tears. She nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered. Last year. Last April. The studio was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Sarah's family members were crying now, holding each other. David, her husband, stepped forward as if to support her, but Sarah held up a hand, indicating she needed to finish, needed to tell this story. Last April, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carried by the microphone to every corner of the studio. We had a real lockdown, not a drill. There was a credible threat that someone was coming to our school with a weapon. We got the alert from the office, and I had to lock my classroom door, turn off the lights, and get my 23 fourth graders into the corner of the room away from the windows. I had to keep them quiet and calm while we waited, not knowing if this was going to be the day, not knowing if someone was actually in the building or trying to get in. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, but kept talking. I had 9-year-olds asking me if they were going to die. I had a little girl named Emma who has anxiety, and she started hyperventilating, and I had to help her breathe while also keeping watch on the door and trying to keep the other 22 kids calm. I had a boy named Marcus who wanted to text his mom to say goodbye, and I had to tell him no, we needed to keep phones silent, but I promised him he would get to see his mom again. I had to be strong for them, Mr. Harvey. I had to pretend I wasn't terrified when I was absolutely terrified. The tears were flowing freely down Sarah's face now, and Steve Harvey was crying too, making no attempt to hide it. The audience was sobbing. The Peterson family, their competitors, were crying. The camera operators, the producers, everyone in that studio was experiencing a moment of collective grief and recognition of what teachers were being asked to carry. We were in lockdown for 45 minutes, Sarah continued. It turned out the threat was not credible. There was no actual shooter, and everyone was safe. But my students didn't know that while we were huddled in that corner. They thought they might die. They were 9 years old, and they thought this might be their last day on Earth. And I had to hold them and comfort them and promise them it would be okay when I didn't actually know if it would be okay. Sarah took a shaky breath. After it was over, after the all clear was given and parents came to pick up their children, I sat in my classroom alone, and I used the supplies from my lockdown kit. Not because we'd had an injury, but because I had an emotional breakdown. I sat there on my classroom floor, eating one of the granola bars I'd packed for the kids, and crying so hard I thought I might be sick. Because I realized that I had just experienced trauma, and my students had experienced trauma, and this is what teaching has become in America. We're not just teaching multiplication and reading comprehension anymore. We're teaching kids how to survive active shooter situations. We're carrying trauma that nobody talks about because we're supposed to be fine. We're supposed to just keep showing up and teaching and pretending that this is normal. Steve Harvey looked at Sarah, and then he looked directly into the camera. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with emotion, but also with conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to really hear what this woman just told us. This is a 4th grade teacher. She teaches 9-year-olds, and she just described having to prepare for the possibility of a mass shooting in her classroom. This is the reality for teachers in America right now. He turned back to Sarah. How did your students handle it afterward? How did they recover from that experience? Sarah's expression was a mixture of pride and heartbreak. That's the thing, Mr. Harvey. They were so brave, so much braver than adults give kids credit for. We spent the next several weeks processing what had happened. I brought in counselors to talk to the kids. We did art therapy, and we wrote letters about our feelings, and we talked about fear and safety, and how to cope with scary experiences. But you know what breaks my heart? Several of my students told me that they weren't that scared because they'd been practicing for this since kindergarten. They're 9 years old, and they've been doing active shooter drills for 4 years. This is their normal. They don't remember a time when school lockdowns weren't part of their education. And that's what I grieve for, Mr. Harvey. I grieve for the innocence that my students have lost, for the childhood that should be about learning and playing and growing, not about surviving and preparing for violence. Sarah wiped her eyes and continued, her voice stronger now, fueled by a passion that had clearly been building for a long time. But here's what I want people to know. Despite all of this, despite the trauma and the fear and the additional burden that's been placed on teachers, we show up. Every single day, we show up. I show up because I love my students. I love teaching them about history and helping them discover that they're good at math or that they love reading. I love watching them grow and learn and become amazing little humans. I love being part of their lives. And I will keep showing up, and I will keep my lockdown kit in my classroom, and I will keep doing everything in my power to protect them, because that's what teachers do. We protect our students. We always have, but now we're being asked to protect them from dangers that we never should have to face. The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. People were crying and clapping simultaneously, moved by Sarah's honesty, her courage, and her unwavering commitment to her students despite the impossible circumstances she and teachers across the country were facing. Steve Harvey waited for the applause to die down, and then he did something that had never been done on Family Feud before. He looked at the camera and made an announcement. "We're going to take a break from the game for a minute," he said. "Because what Sarah just shared with us is more important than any game, more important than any points or prizes. I want to invite Sarah's students, if any of them are watching, and I want to invite teachers all across this country who are carrying this same burden to know that you are seen, you are valued, and what you do matters more than most people realize." He turned to Sarah. "Tell me about your students, the ones who went through that lockdown with you. How are they doing now?" Sarah smiled through her tears, and the love for her students was evident in every word she spoke. "They're amazing, Mr. Harvey. They're resilient and strong, and they're thriving. We're about halfway through this school year now, and I have some of those same students again for different subjects because our school does some mixed grade activities. Seeing them happy and learning and just being kids, that's what keeps me going. Emma, the little girl who had the panic attack during the lockdown, she's doing so much better. She's been working with a therapist, and she's developed coping strategies, and she's even become one of the leaders in our classroom, helping other students when they feel anxious or scared. Sarah continued, her voice filled with pride. Marcus, the boy who wanted to text his mom, he actually started a kindness club at our school. He said that after being so scared, he wanted to make sure everyone felt loved and safe at school every day. So he organized this group of students who do random acts of kindness around the school, leaving nice notes for people, helping younger kids, things like that. These kids took their trauma and they turned it into something beautiful. That's who they are. Steve shook his head in amazement. These kids sound incredible, and they're incredible because they have a teacher like you who helped them process what happened and turn it into something positive. Sarah, I've got to tell you, you are a hero. What you did during that lockdown, keeping those kids safe and calm, and what you've done since then, helping them heal and grow, that's heroic. And I don't think teachers get told that enough. Sarah's husband David stepped forward and asked if he could say something. Steve welcomed him to the microphone. David put his arm around his wife and spoke directly to the camera. I'm a firefighter, he said. I run into burning buildings for a living, and people call me brave. They call me a hero. But my wife, she's the real hero. She faces potential danger every single day in a building full of children she's responsible for protecting, and she does it with grace and love and dedication that takes my breath away. Every morning when she leaves for school, there's a part of me that worries she might not come home, and that's not a fear that teachers' families should have to live with, but we do. He looked at Sarah with clear love and admiration. After the lockdown last year, Sarah came home and she was shaking. She couldn't stop crying, and I held her and I told her she could quit. She could find another job. She didn't have to keep putting herself through this. But you know what she said? She said she couldn't leave her kids, that they needed her, that she was their teacher, and she was going to see them through this. And the next day, even though she was still scared and traumatized, she got up and went back to that school and walked into that classroom and taught those kids with the same love and dedication she always had. That's who she is. That's the kind of person who becomes a teacher. The audience gave another standing ovation. Steve Harvey was openly weeping now, not trying to maintain his professional composure, just existing fully in the emotion of the moment. When the applause finally subsided, Steve made another announcement. Family Feud is going to make a donation to Parkside Elementary School in Sarah's name, he said. We're going to provide funding for additional counseling resources for students and teachers, for improved security measures, and for whatever else the school needs to help students and teachers feel safer. Because this matters. This is more important than entertainment, more important than television. This is about real people, real children, real teachers who are facing something that no one should have to face. Steve then invited the Peterson family to come over and stand with the Mitchell family. The two families, who had been competing against each other moments before, now stood together in solidarity, united in their recognition of what had just been shared. The head of the Peterson family, a man named Robert, spoke up. Our daughter is a teacher too, he said, gesturing to a young woman on his team. And she's been through similar drills and similar fears. We stand with Sarah and with all teachers who are doing this impossible job with love and courage. The game eventually resumed, but everyone knew it didn't really matter who won anymore. The real victory was the truth that had been spoken, the recognition that had been given to teachers and to the trauma they were carrying. The Mitchell family ended up winning the game and going on to play Fast Money. When it came time for Sarah to play her round, Steve approached her with obvious respect. Sarah, he said, before we start Fast Money, I just want to say one more thing. What you shared today is going to reach millions of people, and I hope it changes something. I hope it makes people think differently about teachers, about school safety, about what we're asking of the people we trust with our children. Thank you for your courage in speaking this truth." Sarah nodded, wiping away fresh tears. "Thank you for listening, Mr. Harvey. And thank you for giving me a platform to speak for teachers who maybe don't have a voice. We're all carrying this, all of us who work in schools, and we need people to know. We need people to care. We need things to change." The fast money round proceeded, and Sarah played with the same measured thoughtfulness she had shown throughout the game. When she won, bringing her family's total high enough to claim the prize money, the celebration was joyful, but also carried the weight of everything that had been discussed. Sarah announced that she would be donating a portion of her winnings to fund trauma counseling for teachers at her school and other schools in her district. "Because it's not just the kids who need help processing this," she said. "Teachers are experiencing secondary trauma and compassion fatigue, and we need support too." When the episode aired 3 weeks later, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The clip of Sarah explaining what a lockdown kit was and describing the real lockdown she had experienced went viral within hours, viewed millions of times across social media platforms. The response was a mixture of heartbreak, anger, support for teachers, and calls for change. Parents across the country reached out to thank Sarah for putting into words what their children's teachers were experiencing. Teachers from every state shared their own stories of lockdown drills, real lockdowns, and the emotional toll of preparing to protect students from violence. News outlets picked up the story, and Sarah was invited to appear on national news programs to discuss school safety and the mental health impact on teachers and students. She accepted some of these invitations, always with the same message. Teachers are doing their best in an impossible situation. Students are more resilient than we give them credit for, but they shouldn't have to be resilient in this way. And something has to change in how we approach school safety in America. Educational organizations began using clips from Sarah's Family Feud appearance in professional development trainings, helping teachers process their own trauma and develop strategies for supporting students who had experienced lockdowns. Mental health professionals praised Sarah for bringing attention to an issue that had been largely ignored: the psychological impact of constant threat awareness on both teachers and students. Lawmakers began citing Sarah's testimony in discussions about school safety legislation, using her first-hand account to illustrate the real-world impact of policy decisions. Some focused on gun control, others on mental health resources, others on school security improvements, but all agreed that Sarah had highlighted a problem that could no longer be ignored. For Sarah herself, the experience was both overwhelming and empowering. She received thousands of messages from teachers thanking her for speaking a truth they had been carrying silently. She heard from students, both children and young adults, who shared how lockdown drills and real lockdowns had affected them. She connected with other teachers who had experienced real active shooter situations, forming a support network of people who understood the unique trauma of trying to protect children while facing potential violence. The students from Sarah's class who had experienced the lockdown with her watched the episode with their families. Several parents reached out to Sarah to tell her that watching the episode had helped their children process lingering fears and feelings about the experience. One parent wrote, "My son Marcus watched you on Family Feud, and he said, 'See, Mom, Ms. Mitchell was scared too, but she kept us safe and she still loves us.' It helped him understand that feeling afraid doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human, and that you can be afraid and brave at the same time." Emma's mother sent Sarah a letter describing how Emma had been so proud watching her teacher on television, how Emma had told everyone at her therapy session that her teacher was famous for being brave and honest. You've given her a model for how to talk about hard things, the mother wrote, and that's a gift that will serve her for the rest of her life. 6 months after the episode aired, Sarah was invited to speak at a national education conference. She stood before thousands of educators and shared her story once again, but this time with the benefit of reflection and processing. She talked about the importance of acknowledging trauma rather than suppressing it, of creating space for teachers to be vulnerable and honest about their fears, and of advocating collectively for the resources and changes needed to make schools safer. We can't just accept this as the new normal, Sarah told the assembled educators. We can't just keep doing lockdown drills and assembling emergency kits and pretending this is okay. Our students deserve better. We deserve better. And we have to be willing to speak up, to share our stories, to make people uncomfortable with the reality we're living, because that discomfort is what drives change. The conference gave her a standing ovation, and afterward, dozens of teachers approached her to share their own stories and to thank her for her advocacy. Sarah realized that her appearance on Family Feud had given her something she hadn't expected, a platform and a purpose beyond her classroom. She began writing and speaking more regularly about teacher mental health, school safety, and trauma-informed education. Steve Harvey invited Sarah back to his daytime talk show a year after her Family Feud appearance to give an update on how things had changed. Sarah reported that her school had received significant donations from the community after the episode aired, allowing them to hire additional counselors and improve their security systems. More importantly, they had implemented a comprehensive mental health program that supported both students and teachers in processing trauma and building resilience. The lockdown kit is still in my classroom, Sarah said, and I still hope I never have to use it. But now we're also focusing on prevention, on creating a school culture where students feel connected and supported, where warning signs are noticed and addressed, where mental health is prioritized. We're not just preparing for the worst anymore. We're actively working to create the best possible environment for our kids. Steve asked Sarah about her current students and how teaching had changed for her. Sarah smiled, the genuine joy for her work evident on her face. I love teaching more than ever, she said, because I've learned that being a teacher means being fully human with my students. It means being honest about hard things, being present in difficult moments, and showing them that we can face fear and trauma and still choose hope and growth. My students know I have a lockdown kit. They know I've been through a scary lockdown, and they also know I show up every day because I believe in them and in the power of education to change lives. She continued, This year, I have a new group of fourth graders, and they're wonderful. We're learning about the Revolutionary War right now, and we just finished reading a novel about friendship and courage, and we're preparing for our annual science fair. We do normal school things, learning and growing and having fun. And yes, we also do lockdown drills, and we talk about safety, and we acknowledge hard realities. But we don't let fear define us. We let love define us. We let hope define us. We let learning and curiosity and connection define us. Steve was visibly moved by Sarah's words. He turned to the camera and spoke directly to the audience. I want every teacher watching this to know that you are seen, you are valued, and what you do matters immensely. You're not just teaching subjects, you're shaping lives, you're protecting children, you're creating safety in an unsafe world, and that is heroic work. Don't let anyone diminish what you do or what you carry. He turned back to Sarah. And Sarah, thank you. Thank you for your honesty on Family Feud. Thank you for continuing to speak up for teachers and students, and thank you for being the kind of teacher that every child deserves to have. You're making a difference, not just in your classroom, but across this entire country. 2 years after her Family Feud appearance, Sarah published a book titled The Lockdown Kit, and Other Lessons: What Teachers Know About Surviving and Thriving in Modern Schools. The book combined personal narrative with practical advice for teachers, parents, and policymakers. It became required reading in many teacher education programs and was praised for its honest exploration of the challenges facing modern educators, while also celebrating the resilience and dedication of teachers. In the book's introduction, Sarah wrote about her Family Feud experience. When I answered Lockdown Kit to that question, I didn't plan to share my story. I was just being honest, giving the answer I knew was correct from my lived experience as a teacher. But in that moment of honesty, something broke open, both for me and for thousands of other teachers who had been carrying this same burden in silence. I learned that speaking truth, even uncomfortable truth, creates space for healing and change. I learned that my story mattered, that the stories of all teachers matter, and that when we speak up together, people listen. The book included testimonials from other teachers across the country, each sharing their own experiences with school safety, lockdowns, and the emotional labor of teaching in an era of school shootings. It also included perspectives from students who had experienced lockdowns, offering insight into how children process these events and what they need from adults to feel safe and supported. The final chapter focused on hope and action, outlining specific steps that schools, communities, and policymakers could take to improve school safety, while also supporting the mental health of students and teachers. Sarah's former students, now middle schoolers, remained in touch with her. Many of them attended the book launch event at a local bookstore, where Sarah read from the chapter about their shared lockdown experience. Afterward, Emma, now 11 and flourishing, spoke to the crowd. Ms. Mitchell taught us that it's okay to be scared, and it's okay to talk about hard things, Emma said. She made us feel safe even when the situation was scary. And she's still teaching us, even though we're not in her class anymore, because she's showing us that our voices matter and our stories matter, and we can make the world better by being brave enough to tell the truth. Marcus, the boy who had started the Kindness Club, also spoke. After the lockdown, I was really angry, he admitted. I was angry that this was something we had to go through, angry that school wasn't always safe, just angry at everything. But Ms. Mitchell helped me turn that anger into action. She taught me that instead of just being mad about problems, we can work to solve them. That's why I started the Kindness Club, and that's why I want to be a teacher someday, just like her, so I can help kids feel safe and loved and like they can change the world. Steve Harvey, who had stayed in touch with Sarah over the years, wrote the foreword to her book. In it, he reflected on the day she appeared on Family Feud and how that episode had changed his own perspective. I thought I was hosting a game show, he wrote, but what Sarah showed me that day was that every interaction, every platform, every moment of visibility is an opportunity to speak truth and create change. Sarah Mitchell took a simple game show question and turned it into a national conversation about what we're asking of our teachers and what we owe to our children. She reminded all of us that behind every profession are real people with real struggles, and that when we honor their truth and listen to their stories, we open the door to understanding and action. The impact of Sarah's Family Feud appearance and subsequent advocacy work extended far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. School districts across the country implemented new protocols for supporting teacher mental health. Foundations were established to provide trauma counseling for educators. Legislation was passed in several states, improving school safety infrastructure and increasing mental health resources. None of these changes can be attributed solely to Sarah's moment on Family Feud, but her willingness to speak uncomfortable truth in a public forum contributed to a broader cultural shift in how people thought about teachers, school safety, and childhood trauma. 5 years after her appearance on the show, Sarah was still teaching 4th grade at Parkside Elementary. She still had a lockdown kit in her classroom, though thankfully she hadn't had to use it in a real emergency since that day 5 years earlier. Her classroom walls were covered with student artwork, inspirational quotes, and photographs from field trips and class celebrations. In one corner was a framed photograph of her with Steve Harvey from her Family Feud appearance, and next to it was a letter from Emma that read, "Thank you for keeping us safe and teaching us to be brave." Sarah's story reminds us that teachers are so much more than instructors delivering curriculum. They are protectors, counselors, trauma responders, and everyday heroes who show up for children even when the circumstances are frightening and difficult. They carry burdens that most people never see, preparing for worst-case scenarios while trying to create environments of joy and learning. They love their students fiercely, advocate for them tirelessly, and often sacrifice their own well-being to ensure that children are safe, supported, and able to learn. As we close this powerful story, I want you to think about the teachers in your life or in the lives of children you love. Think about what they carry, what they prepare for, what they sacrifice to show up every day and educate our children. If this story has moved you, if it's opened your eyes to the reality that teachers face, if it's made you appreciate the incredible work educators do every single day, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with a teacher and let them know they're valued. Share it with parents so they understand what their children's teachers are navigating. Share it with anyone who needs to understand that teaching in America today requires not just knowledge and skill, but extraordinary courage and love. Sarah Mitchell walked onto a game show stage planning to play a fun game with her family, and she walked off having started a national conversation that continues to this day. Her final answer on Family Feud revealed what her students survived, but it also revealed who she is, a teacher who refuses to pretend everything is fine when it's not, who speaks truth even when it's uncomfortable, and who shows up every single day to love and protect and teach children because that's what teachers do. They are the quiet heroes in our communities, the ones who shape the next generation while carrying burdens that would break most people. They deserve our recognition, our support, and our commitment to creating a world where lockdown kits aren't necessary, where children can learn without fear, and where teachers can focus on education rather than survival. Thank you, Sarah Mitchell, and thank you to every teacher who carries these same burdens with grace and dedication. You are seen, you are valued, and you are making a difference that will echo through generations.